Okay, welcome. And those of you trying their seats, if you want to find a seat, please feel free to walk down and find those other seats. So it's an exciting time to the start of a conference is always an exciting time. So my name's Karim Khan, and I'm the Director of Research and Education here. And it's a great privilege to just do a little MC role this morning. That's the hat I'm wearing right now. So I'm going to just introduce Dr. Hakeem Shalabi. But before I do that, just for our guests from countries like Australia where they don't understand the Middle East properly, we have first name principal, Dr. Hakeem, Dr. Olivier, and so Dr. Chris Gore will be Dr. Chris. Okay, so it's a very easy thing to do in the Middle East, and many of you know that, and the Gulf region. So just a little tip from those who haven't had a chance to read your guidebooks on the flights. So Dr. Hakeem is the acting CMO here. He's been a visionary leader of the Aspetar Hospital since its inception, responsible for terrific hires in the leadership and great vision in sports science and performance, as we're going to hear about today. So it's a great honour to be working in the team with Dr. Hakeem. And Dr. Hakeem, thanks for coming to open the conference.
Thank you, Karim. I would like to, on behalf of Dr. Khalifa Al-Kuwari, our Chief Executive Officer, who is currently outside but is going to come join us soon, and on myself to welcome all of you, especially people coming from outside this country, and also the organizer of this great conference, I mean Dr. Olivier Girard and Professor Karim Khan. It's a great honor for us to host this kind of conference, part of our main research strategy goals. I mean, the altitude and performance is one of our 9 main research topics in Aspetar. As you know, we are at the level of the sea, but we have also some facilities that allow us also to try to do some research. And Olivier Girard, for example, was part of those people who came for that. So thanks to all of you to highlight this very important issues, altitude training and team sports. We are trying from several years to set up a kind of strategy regarding that, and it's a priority also for Aspetar, as well as the Ramadan and sport, as well as the heat and exercise. And I'm glad today to start this conference, which will allow us maybe to have a consensus statement later on, I mean by tomorrow. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce you one of our friends, Dr. Michel Doug, which is the chairman of the medical committee of the FIFA. FIFA is the Football International Federation, of course, but he's also the chairman of the UEFA medical committee as well. He's also a member of the executive committee of the FIFA, and is one of the legends of the sports medicine and football. So please, a warm welcome to Michel Doug.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Dr. Hakeem Shalabi, for your kind introduction. It gives me always great pleasure to come back to Qatar and to Doha and to Aspetar. And I'm proud and grateful to be here. I am proud because since many years, the Medical Committee of FIFA and the FMARC, FIFA Medical Assessment and Research Center, and the Medical Center of Aspetar work closely together. So permit me to say that I feel a little bit coming home, as Aspetar is a FMARC Medical Center of Excellence of FIFA. As you know, FIFA has some medical ambassadors all over the world, working together in the different possibilities of sports medicine, having centers in New Zealand, in Argentina, and so on. We are about 32 centers for the moment. One of these centers is the Aspetar Center, and it was the Aspetar Center under the direction of Dr. Hakeem Shalabi, who invited last year all the centers to come here in this same auditorium and to see what we can do together, and I am still grateful for that. So my second point is I am very grateful to be here because the fantastic scientific work that is done here under the direction of the top scientific leaders in sports medicine of the world makes a great advantage for us. Having said that, Let me present you a little speech about the FIFA vision concerning altitude. I am not a specialist in altitude. I am a locomotoric guy. But in a symposium in 2007, where many of you were present, I have learned a lot, and it is that synthesis of this conference that I bring to you today. We are 2013, so a lot of things have changed. Perhaps this vision of 2007 could be a good start of the meeting. And I can assure you, I will listen very carefully to you afterwards, because I can learn a lot about the things that have happened over the last 6 years. Thank you for that. So, ladies and gentlemen, FIFA is an international federation. The Fédération Internationale de Football Association. The name is French. Why? Because it has been created in France, in Paris, in 1904. And it consists for the moment, it started with 7 members, it consists for the moment of 209 member associations from all around the world. And these member associations are organizing football competitions. You know that. Within their continental confederations, and here you see an image, AFC Asia, CAF Africa, UEFA Europe, CONMEBOL South America, CONCACAF North and Middle America, and then OFC Oceania. So these matches within the continent serve as qualification matches for the flagship competitions, the FIFA World Cups. And FIFA organizes not one World Cup, but 13 World Championships for both sexes, for different age categories. And of course, the most important one, the FIFA World Cup for men, is played every 4 years. And then, if I am well, in 2022, Dr. Hakim, it will be played here, I suppose. I don't know if it will be in summer or in winter. We will see. We will have to discuss that. It is played every 4 years with 32 teams. The FIFA Women World Cup with 16, and next time with 24 teams, it will be in Canada. So, due to the geographic locations, the visiting national teams are confronted with playing not only at different altitude, but also under different environmental conditions, such as heat, cold, and the different relative humidity as compared to their home country. The challenge is to guarantee the basic principle of fair play, offering equal chances for the home and visiting team under these varying circumstances. And as I told you, FIFA has organized in 2007 a consensus meeting with 12 international scientists who have performed their own research in this respect. The consensus provided recommendations and guidelines for training and playing at different altitude, taking note that, due to the surcharged football calendar, a long adaptation period is not possible. Ladies and gentlemen, this is one of my great concerns. When I was a young team doctor, most teams played about 30 to 35 games every year. Nowadays, the top players in the world go to 90 performances every year with their team, with their national association, in Champions Leagues, and so on and so on. So this leads, now I speak like a locomotoric doctor, this leads to an enormous surcharge of the cartilage of these guys. But of course, this is also not so good for their general health, particularly not if they have to perform the Saturday in Manchester, Wednesday later in Bolivia, in La Paz at altitude, as you know, and then one Saturday later again in England in their competition. Can you imagine the repercussion on the human body from all that? So let's come to the specificities of football. It is a complex activity whereby players during 90 minutes perform repeated sprints, but also cover a total running distance of 10 to 14 kilometers. The anaerobic and aerobic activities and the football-specific performance require skills which are decisive for the outcome of the match. And these skills depend on the training exercises and on intact cognitive functions and coordination as a result of neuromuscular mechanism. What is now important on playing at different altitude? First of all, of course, the absolute level of altitude, that's evident. But also the difference between the normal level of living and the level of playing. The change in altitude will have a different impact on a player who lives near sea level and is going to play at high altitude above 3,000 meters or around 4,000 meters like in La Paz, as compared to a player who lives at higher altitude up to 2,000 meters and is going to play at high altitude above 3,000 meters. Also important is the influence of 3 different environmental conditions, such as heat, cold, and different relative humidity. And then a technical aspect, due to the different air density, the aerodynamics of the ball are changing considerably. I tell you a little anecdote from my own experience. I guided the Belgian delegation in 1986 in Mexico, where we played in Toluca, and I will never forget the first training. My goalkeeper became completely shocked because he said, when there is a corner and the ball comes to me, I want to catch it, and the ball goes 1 meter above me. He had to adapt completely in the beginning phase because precisely of the conditions of altitude. That was Jean-Marie Pfaff. You remember him? Now, some definitions. 0 to 500, near sea level. 500 to 1,000, low. 2 to 3, moderate. 3 to 5, high. And then above 5, extreme altitude. These are the definitions that some of you learned me in 2007. Let's now come to the performance in football at different altitude. First of all, players living at sea level or low altitude will have to cope with a reduction of their aerobic performance when playing at moderate and high altitude, which continually increases with the level of altitude. Highly trained players suffer higher reductions in performance than untrained individuals, and they will experience minor impairment of performance starting at 500 meters and substantial impairment above 3,000 meters. They will not suffer impairment of performance in single sprints with altitude, but however, they might suffer impairment of performance in repeated sprints due to an increased recovery time at moderate and even more at high altitude. Players living at moderate to high altitude will have some improvement in aerobic performance with descent when playing at sea level or low altitude. However, this improvement is limited by a lower capacity for oxygen usage. They might have a disadvantage due to empiric observations of a lower performance on the first days at low altitude, but this area was, in 2007, poorly investigated. Could have changed today. Environmental factors, temperature, humidity, and different handling of the ball, due to the altered aerodynamics, will negatively affect the performance of players living at sea level or low altitude when playing at moderate and high altitude. And this applies vice versa for players living at moderate or high altitude when playing near sea level or low altitude. Now, recommendations for the preparation. First of all, the acclimatization, of course. Players ascending from sea level to low altitude do not necessarily require specific preparation because the reduction of performance is minor. However, above 1,500 meters, a short acclimatization period of 3 to 5 days may be useful to approach peak performance. In players ascending from sea level to moderate altitude, an acclimatization period of 1 to 2 weeks at the location of the match is recommendable to approach peak performance. And there you see already my problem. I can say to the president of Manchester United, your player has to play in Bolivia next Wednesday. He should be on the place 2 weeks before. You can imagine what he will answer to me. I have 5 competition games in that period, so try to find another solution. In players ascending from sea level to high altitude, an acclimatization period of at minimum 2 weeks at the location of the match is required to achieve peak performance. This is, of course, theory. Now, the training concepts. You know them all. Live high, train low. Intermittent hypoxic exposure. We will speak a lot about that, I think, in these days. And live low and train high. So The sleep and live high and train low training concept was not recommended when playing near sea level. An enhancement of aerobic performance at sea level has been observed after exposure to moderate altitude of, listen well, at least 12 or 14 hours a day for a minimum of 3 weeks. So you have understood. It is unclear whether this translates to improved football performance. It cannot be recommended when playing at moderate or high altitude, as the hypothetical potential of this method for acclimatization and any benefits for playing football were not evaluated in 2007. The intermittent hypoxic exposure at rest concept was not recommended for playing football at any altitude, as they said, you said in 2007, it did not improve performance. In the meantime, I have learned different things. I have learned that the muscle cells are very sensible to hypoxia. Hypoxia blocks the destruction of HEF1 alpha, a protein that supports the modification of genes concerned by oxygen transport, the metabolism of carbohydrates, the biogenesis, the mitochondrial metabolism, the pH regulations, and so influence positively the sport performance, especially in case of intense efforts. That's what I have read in the scientific books. Believe me, it does not come out of my mind. The live low, train high training concept is not recommended when playing at or near sea level, as it does not improve performance, and is not recommended when playing at moderate or high altitude, as the effects on performance and acclimatization have not sufficiently been evaluated in high-level athletes, and as it is not practical for team sports. But is that still so today? You will learn me. Acute altitude illnesses. In healthy players living at moderate or high altitude, there is no increased risk to their general health when playing at low altitude or near sea level, apart from the general risk of injury, of course. In healthy players living near sea level or at low altitude, there is no increased risk to general health when playing at moderate or high altitude, apart from the individually variable risk of acute high-altitude illnesses. Acute high-altitude illnesses such as acute mountain sickness, AMS, high-altitude pulmonary edema, or high-altitude cerebral edema do not occur at low altitude, since there is a threshold altitude of about 2,000 meters. At moderate altitude, the risk of AMS for players living at sea level or low altitude is low, and the illness usually mild. In healthy individuals, they can hardly ever occur at moderate altitude. Oh, no. At high altitude, particularly near and above 4,000 meters, the risk of AMS is considerable for players living at sea level or low altitude, and the illness can be more severe. Without proper treatment, AMS may progress to high-altitude cerebral edema. High-altitude pulmonary edema may occur particularly above 4,000 meters. They are life-threatening diseases that can, however, be easily treated by supplemental oxygen and descent. The risk of AMS for players living at sea level or low altitude depends on their individual susceptibility, the degree of acclimatization, the rate of ascent, and the intensity of exercise. Mild AMS symptoms, such as mild headache, loss of appetite, impaired sleep, or dizziness, do not prevent a healthy player from playing, but might still impair performance. Several AMS symptoms, cerebral or pulmonary edema, will prevent a player from playing. So now recommendations for prevention and treatment of AMS. No specific ascent modality is needed when ascending for matches or competitions from low to moderate altitude. Staged ascent will prevent severe high-altitude illnesses in players from near sea level or low altitude when playing a match or competition at high altitude. And for each 300 to 500 meters above 2,000 meters, 1 day of acclimatization should be spent at an intermediate, moderate altitude. In susceptible individuals, AMS can be prevented by drugs such as acetazolamide or glucocorticosteroids, but then we come on another field. These are both on the WADA list of prohibited substances, and in this period where the doping activity is real, the great actuality, I think it is better to avoid these products. Moderate AMS can be treated with rest and non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. If no improvement occurs within 1 day, or in case of severe AMS and beginning cerebral or pulmonary edema, supplementary oxygen and descent are mandatory. A consensus meeting of experts, I told you, in October 2007, has resulted in a recommendation that playing above 2,750 meters required a team to have at least 3 days of acclimatization. So, dear friends, this was the FIFA vision, thanks to some of you who learned us a lot about that. I think, Dr. Shalabi, that it could be a good start to see what has occurred over the last 5 or 6 years. And the first one to take the profit of that will be me. I thank you very much for your kind attention.
That is a perfect launching pad for this symposium, and specifically this symposium has been led in Aspetar by Dr. Olivier Girard, and I'm just having the pleasure of getting to know Olivier since I started in January. Olivier has been here since 2008. He finished his doctorate in 2006, and so he's coming to that stage of a career where he's either going to make it to that level of the champions that you've invited to this meeting, Olivier, and I'm confident that you will, but this is a great opportunity for you, so I'm going to hand it over to you to take it from here. Let's welcome Olivier.
Good morning, everyone. I would like to extend a warm welcome from Dr. Hakim and Dr. Karim and Dr. Khalifa to you, to Aspetar. Welcome. So, if I can display. So my task now is to give you an overview of the 2 days conference. So I think pretty much everything started 45 years ago at the Mexico Olympics, when it was quite clear that sprinters or jumpers benefited from altitude, whereas the athletes involved in the middle and long distance suffer from altitude, because it was no world record that was set at this Olympics. And another interesting observation was also that all the gold medalists came from the altitude-based countries. So from this date, altitude or hypoxic training became quite popular in the belief that it will further enhance exercise performance at sea level, or it will improve competition through acclimatization purpose. So there are different hypoxic methods that can be used to potentially achieve these two objectives. The first one, the classical altitude, was the live high, train high methods. Then in the mid-90s, I believe, like the Americans, led by Dr. Levin, proposed the live high, train low method, which allowed to benefit from the chronic exposure to altitude, but also to be able to train at altitude near sea level. And now, in more recent years, through the development of the technology, we have access to the live low and train high methods. So that's quite interesting to observe that all around the world, many sports institutes are equipped with hypoxic facilities now. And you guys from the media, you report that whether it is for the preparation of the season or for preparation of a big competition such as the World Cup, as underlined by Dr. Michel Touk, team sport athletes are using altitude training more than ever before. That's quite interesting. But is it supported by the research? So what I did is just quickly look at the PubMed, and I entered these few keywords, And it's quite interesting to observe that the research dedicated to the endurance performance related to altitude training is increasingly popular. You can see that in recent years there's an exponential increase in the number of publications related to this topic on the endurance performance. However, if you look at what happened to the sprint performance here on the red, you can see that it's much less, and by far what we know is coming from the individual or endurance athlete, and not much is known on the team sport. And you can see that the research is very recent, only during the last few years, even after the 2007 FIFA meeting. However, the reality, as underlined by Professor Doug, is that major team sport competition are played at altitude. And here we have Dr. George Nassis, who is the head of excellence in football. He conducted an interesting study looking at the FIFA World Cup match during the last World Cup. And he reported that when matches were played at an altitude above 1,200 meters, there was a 3% lower distance covered during the match compared to the sea level, which clearly highlights the need for acclimatization. There is no doubt that altitude training is a key area for major sport governing bodies such as FIFA and also IOC. Two recent consensus statements have been published during the last few years, and they clearly highlight that there is not much research and no consensus. So this is where we are today, and therefore the question that is central to this symposium is try to have some answer to this question. Does actually altitude training will improve team sport performance? Welcome to Qatar. So, as Dr. Hakim said, Qatar is quite a hot country during summer. Even if it was raining yesterday, we get the chance to see that. Trust me, it's not happening quite often. It's a country that is covered by sand quite a lot, but also the maximum altitude in Qatar just exceeds 100 meters. So you can question at first why we are interested in altitude training in Qatar. But here comes Aspetar. Aspetar is the first orthopedic and sports medicine hospital in the Middle East. It's also a medical center of excellence by FIFA. And as you can see, we are quite lucky and fortunate to have world-class facilities, including 25 hypoxic normobaric rooms upstairs. We also have all the state-of-the-art facilities to train the athletes and also lead a team of doctors to treat them. So we believe that using these facilities and also the knowledge of the people that are working here through the environment in Qatar. It's hot in the summer, but also the heat can be used to also improve performance, and combining training at altitude with such a fancy new tool that will be introduced to you this afternoon of training in the heat, and this combined with the possibility to sleep in very comfortable condition in our dormitories can potentially improve performance of our team sport athletes. And the challenge that we are taking here in Aspetar is trying to understand what could be the impact of the acute and chronic exposure effect of altitude, and this will guide some advice to best prepare competition of our athletes or the visiting teams to Qatar, because as you might know, we have like quite big challenge coming on with the handball World Cup after 3 years, and of course after less than 10 years the FIFA World Cup. So thanks all for coming today for this two-day conference. We'll try to answer this question. So to do so, the latest research on the basic but also on applied aspect of altitude training will be discussed here. It will be featured, this conference, more than 25 presentations, including the world leader, I believe, on the field of altitude training, but also it's a mixed audience with people working close to the athletes. So I think it's the magic recipe if you want to implement this. So discussion around metabolic cardiovascular, neuromuscular aspect of altitude during exercise and used for chronic purpose. And this tomorrow we'll discuss and try to summarize all the ideas that came up during the first 2 days to establish, if we can, a consensus, and then to give some practical recommendation and guidelines to the one working close to the athletes. So I think it's nearly 9 o'clock, so I will now kick off, and I will introduce my colleague George Nassis, who is the head of the football excellence here at Aspetar. George was working before with the athletes because he was involved in the Panathinaikos football clubs. He joined Aspetar maybe a year and a half ago, and then he's in charge of implementing our mission, which is to improve the performance of our athletes in the different clubs in the youth. So please join me to welcome George.